Hospital refused a single dad veteran's daughter life-saving surgery. Then the chief surgeon saw who was on the phone and collapsed in shock. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the quiet streets of Cedar Grove, a small town where everyone knew their neighbors and life moved at its own gentle pace. Jack Miller walked hand in hand with his daughter Emily, their footsteps echoing on the worn sidewalk leading to the elementary school. Jack couldn't help but notice how Emily's usual bounce was missing from her step. Her face, normally rosy and bright, looked pale against her purple backpack straps. She clutched her favorite stuffed elephant, something she usually left at home these days. "You sure you're feeling okay, sweetheart?" Jack asked, his weathered face creasing with concern. 8 years of military service had taught him to trust his instincts, and something felt off. Emily squeezed his hand. "I'm fine, Daddy. Just a little tired." She smiled up at him, her blue eyes twinkling with that special light that reminded him so much of her mother. "Besides, we're doing art projects today. I can't miss that." Jack knelt down, adjusting her crooked collar. "You know you can tell me if you're not feeling well, right?" "I know, Daddy." She wrapped her arms around his neck, her familiar strawberry shampoo filling his nose. "You worry too much. Mommy always said that." The mention of Sarah, gone 3 years now, made Jack's heart clench. He forced a smile. "That she did." He stood up, his bad knee protesting slightly. "All right, kiddo, have a great day. I'll pick you up at 3. Emily waved goodbye and joined the stream of children flooding into the red brick building. Jack watched until she disappeared through the double doors, trying to shake off the nagging worry in his gut. The hardware store where Jack worked part-time was only a few blocks away. Thompson's Hardware had been a fixture in Cedar Grove for 40 years, and Old Man Thompson had given Jack the job when he'd returned from his last tour, no questions asked. The familiar smell of sawdust and metal greeted him as he pushed open the door, the little bell jingling overhead. "Morning, Jack," Thompson called from behind the counter, his white mustache twitching as he smiled. "Got a shipment of power tools needs organizing in aisle 3. The morning passed in a blur of inventory counts and helping customers find the right size screws for their projects. Jack was explaining the differences between drill bits to Mrs. Henderson when his phone buzzed in his pocket. Seeing the school's number flash across the screen made his heart stop. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Henderson. I need to take this." His hands trembled slightly as he answered. "Hello? Mr. Miller?" The school secretary's voice was tight with urgency. "Emily collapsed in her art class. The ambulance is on its way." The world tilted sideways. "I'm coming right now." Jack barely remembered shouting an explanation to Thompson or running the 6 blocks to Cedar Grove General Hospital. His military training kicked in, helping him stay focused despite the panic threatening to overwhelm him. The emergency room's automatic doors whooshed open, and he rushed to the desk. "My daughter, Emily Miller," he managed between heavy breaths. "She was brought in by ambulance from Cedar Grove Elementary." The nurse pointed him toward a curtained area. "Bay 3, Mr. Miller." Emily lay small and fragile on the white hospital bed, her skin almost as pale as the sheets. Various machines beeped around her, and an oxygen mask covered her face. Her art teacher, Mrs. Roberts, stood nearby, wringing her hands. "She just fell over during class," Mrs. Roberts explained, her voice shaking. "No warning, nothing." A doctor in a white coat appeared, holding a clipboard. His face was set in professional neutrality. "Mr. Miller? I'm Dr. Reynolds. We've run some tests on Emily." Jack gripped the bed rail, his knuckles white. "What's wrong with my daughter?" "Emily has a serious heart condition that requires immediate surgical intervention." Dr. Reynolds flipped through his papers. "There's significant damage to her mitral valve that's causing her heart to fail." The words hit Jack like physical blows. "Surgery? When? That's what we need to discuss." "Doctor." Reynolds' tone grew colder, more clinical. "Our records show your insurance won't cover this procedure. Without proper coverage or payment arrangements, we cannot schedule the surgery." Jack's military discipline cracked. "What do you mean you can't schedule it? She needs help." "Hospital policy is very clear, Mr. Miller. We require either insurance approval or payment arrangements before we can proceed with any non-emergency surgery." "My daughter collapsing isn't an emergency?" Jack's voice rose, drawing looks from nearby staff. Dr. Reynolds adjusted his glasses. "She's stable for now. We can maintain her on medication temporarily, but without surgery." He left the sentence hanging. Jack pulled out his wallet with shaking hands. I have some savings. And my VA benefits. The procedure costs well over $200,000, Mr. Miller. Your VA benefits don't cover dependents for this type of surgery, and without approved insurance. Dr. Reynolds shook his head. I'm sorry, but my hands are tied. Jack looked at Emily, unconscious and pale, tubes snaking from her arms. His little girl, Sarah's daughter. The thought of losing her too. There has to be something we can do. You can try applying for financial assistance or seeking treatment at another facility. Doctor, Reynolds' voice was flat, rehearsed. But until payment arrangements are made, we cannot proceed. Jack's jaw clenched so tight it hurt. He'd survived firefights and IED attacks, saved his entire unit in Kandahar, earned medals for bravery under fire, but now, watching his daughter fight for her life while a doctor quoted policy at him, he'd never felt more helpless. The beeping of Emily's heart monitor filled the silence, each chirp a reminder of how precious and precarious her life had become. Jack stared at Dr. Reynolds, a desperate father facing an immovable wall of hospital bureaucracy, knowing that somewhere in this building, the very equipment that could save his daughter sat idle while time slipped away. Jack Miller stood in the stark white hospital hallway, his military posture crumbling as he faced the hospital administrator. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his weathered face, making the dark circles under his eyes more pronounced. Please, he said, his voice hoarse. My daughter needs this surgery. There has to be something we can work out. The administrator, a thin woman with wire-rimmed glasses, clutched her clipboard like a shield. Mr. Miller, I understand your situation. But hospital policy is very clear. Without proper insurance coverage or upfront payment, we cannot schedule the procedure. Through the window of Emily's room, Jack could see his little girl lying motionless on the hospital bed, her small chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Various machines beeped steadily, monitoring her fragile heart. Two nurses at the nearby station exchanged glances, their faces filled with sympathy they couldn't voice. One of them, an older woman with silver hair, quickly wiped away a tear when she thought no one was looking. I served this country, Jack said, struggling to keep his voice steady. 8 years in the Army, 2 tours. I've never asked for special treatment, but please, this is my daughter we're talking about. The administrator's expression softened slightly, but her grip on the clipboard didn't loosen. Thank you for your service, Mr. Miller, but I'm afraid that doesn't change our position. The surgery costs. I'll work it off, Jack interrupted, desperation creeping into his voice. I can pick up extra shifts at the hardware store. I can work here at the hospital, cleaning, maintenance, anything. Please, just help my little girl. A young doctor passing by slowed his pace, pretending to study a chart while listening to the exchange. Jack noticed how the medical staff seemed to want to help, but remained silent under the weight of hospital regulations. Mr. Miller, the administrator said, her tone mechanical. We cannot accept payment plans or work arrangements for procedures of this magnitude. The liability alone. Liability? Jack's voice cracked. We're talking about a 9-year-old girl's life. Several heads turned in their direction, and Jack forced himself to lower his voice. His military training had taught him to maintain composure under pressure, but this was different. This was Emily. The administrator took a step back. I'm sorry, but unless you can provide payment or find alternative coverage, we can only provide basic care to stabilize her condition. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor. Jack stood there, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The helplessness he felt was worse than any combat situation he'd faced. In war, he'd always had a mission, a clear objective. But now, watching his daughter through that window, he felt completely powerless. As evening settled in, Jack sat in the uncomfortable chair beside Emily's bed. The room was quiet except for the steady beeping of monitors and the soft whoosh of the oxygen machine. Emily's favorite stuffed rabbit, worn from years of love, lay tucked under her arm. I'm so sorry, sweetheart, he whispered, gently holding her small hand. Your dad's supposed to protect you, to fix things. His voice caught in his throat. I promise I won't let you down. We've been through tough times before, right? After your mom. He couldn't finish the sentence. The night nurse came in to check Emily's vitals, offering Jack a sympathetic smile and a cup of coffee. He thanked her automatically, his mind already racing through options. His savings were depleted from previous medical bills. His veterans' benefits weren't enough. He'd already sold his truck and most of his valuable possessions. As midnight approached, Jack pulled out his phone, staring at it for a long moment. His thumb hovered over a number he hadn't dialed in years. Making this call felt like admitting defeat. But for Emily, he'd swallow every last bit of pride he had. In the dim light of the hospital room, Jack pressed the call button and held the phone to his ear. Each ring seemed to last an eternity. "Mike?" he whispered when the call connected, trying not to wake Emily. "It's Jack Miller." He paused, swallowing hard. "Brother, I need help. It's my little girl." His voice cracked on the last word, and he had to take a deep breath before continuing. "I know it's been a while, but I didn't know who else to call. Emily's heart." "They won't." He glanced at his sleeping daughter, her face peaceful despite the tubes and wires surrounding her. "They won't help her without payment up front. I don't know what to do, Mike. I can't lose her too." The desperation in his whispered words filled the quiet hospital room as he waited for his old Army buddy's response. Morning sunlight crept through the thin hospital curtains, painting gentle stripes across Emily's pale face. Her eyes fluttered open, finding Jack slumped in the chair beside her bed. He hadn't left her side all night, his large frame awkwardly folded into the small visitor's chair. "Daddy?" Emily's voice was barely a whisper. Jack immediately straightened, his hand finding hers. "I'm right here, sweetheart." Emily's fingers felt so small and fragile in his calloused palm. Her usually bright eyes were clouded with exhaustion, but that spark of hope he loved so much still shone through. "Am I going to be okay?" Jack swallowed hard, forcing a smile onto his face. "Of course you are, Em. Your old dad's taking care of everything." He smoothed her dark hair away from her forehead, just like her mother used to do. "You just focus on getting your rest. Promise?" She squeezed his hand weakly. "Cross my heart." Jack made the gesture over his chest, ignoring how his throat tightened around the words. Emily drifted back to sleep, and Jack watched the morning sun climb higher outside the window. His phone vibrated in his pocket. Mike, his old Army buddy, returning his desperate late-night call. "Jack." Mike's familiar voice brought a rush of memories from their deployment days. "I got your message. Tell me what's happening." Jack stepped into the hallway, keeping Emily's door in sight. "It's my daughter, Mike. Her heart condition. It's gotten worse. The local hospital won't help without insurance coverage." His voice cracked slightly. "I don't know what to do." "Listen carefully," Mike said. "I know someone, Dr. Jonathan Hayes. He's chief surgeon at Metropolitan General in the city. One of the best heart specialists in the country. Mike, I can't afford, just hear me out. Hayes is a good man. He was in the service too. Let me give you his direct number. He owes me a favor, and I'm calling it in for you." Jack scribbled the number on his palm with a borrowed pen, thanking Mike with a gruff voice that betrayed more emotion than he intended. Back in Emily's room, he watched her sleeping face for a long moment, gathering his courage. Then he stepped out to the quiet end of the hallway and dialed. "Dr. Hayes' office," a crisp voice answered. "This is Jack Miller. I need to speak with Dr. Hayes about my daughter. Mike Reynolds gave me this number." There was a pause then. "One moment, please." Jack paced the short stretch of hallway, his boots silent on the polished floor. His free hand clenched and unclenched, a nervous habit from his military days. "This is Dr. Hayes." The voice was deep, authoritative, but not unkind. "Dr. Hayes, thank you for taking my call." Jack took a deep breath. "My daughter Emily needs heart surgery. She's 9 years old, and the local hospital won't operate because of insurance issues. Mike Reynolds said you might be willing to hear me out." "Ah, yes. Mike mentioned you might call. Tell me about your daughter's condition." Jack detailed Emily's congenital heart defect, the recent collapse, everything the local doctors had told him. Hayes listened intently, occasionally asking precise, technical questions that Jack did his best to answer. "Mr. Miller, this definitely requires immediate attention. I'd like to review her files. What did you say your full name was again?" "Jack Miller, formerly Staff Sergeant, U.S. Army, 3rd Infantry Division." It was an old habit, introducing himself with his military credentials when speaking to another veteran. The line went silent for a moment. Then there was a sharp intake of breath. "Staff Sergeant Jack Miller? From the Mosul incident?" Hayes' voice had changed, becoming strange and distant. "Yes, sir, that's correct." There was a clatter on the other end of the line, followed by a heavy thud. Jack heard a female voice in the background cry out, "Dr. Hayes!" Then the line went dead. Jack stared at his phone in confusion, the dial tone humming in his ear. He couldn't know that at that exact moment, Dr. Jonathan Hayes was lying unconscious on his office floor, while his secretary rushed to his side, knocking over a framed combat medal in her haste to help him. In the quiet hospital hallway, Jack lowered his phone slowly, his mind racing. What had just happened? More importantly, what would this mean for Emily? He turned to look through the window at his sleeping daughter, feeling the weight of uncertainty pressing down on his shoulders once again. The morning sun continued its climb, casting long shadows through the hospital corridors. As Jack stood frozen in place, his phone still clutched in his hand, waiting for it to ring again. Dr. Jonathan Hayes blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights of his office ceiling. A concerned nurse hovered over him, pressing a cold compress to his forehead. "Dr. Hayes, should I call for additional help?" The nurse's voice was tight with worry. Hayes waved her off, pushing himself up from the floor with trembling hands. His designer suit was wrinkled, and his usually pristine silver hair was disheveled. No, I'm fine." He straightened his tie, trying to regain his composure. "But I need Emily Miller's file, right now." The nurse hesitated. "Sir, you just fainted?" "The file," he insisted, his voice carrying the authority that had made him chief surgeon. "Please." Once alone in his office, Hayes sank into his leather chair, staring at the phone on his desk. Jack Miller. The name alone transported him back 15 years, to a place he'd tried so hard to forget. The scorching desert Sunday, the taste of sand and copper in his mouth, the deafening explosions. Hayes had been a civilian doctor, volunteering with Doctors Without Borders when their convoy was attacked. He could still hear the rapid gunfire, smell the burning vehicles. He'd been thrown clear in the initial blast, his legs shattered, unable to move as flames spread toward the leaking fuel tank. That's when Sergeant Jack Miller appeared through the smoke like an angel of mercy. Despite heavy fire, Jack had crawled to him, shielding Hayes's body with his own. "I've got you, Doc," Jack had said, his voice steady even as bullets whizzed past. "We're getting out of here." Hayes touched his leg unconsciously, remembering how Jack had dragged him to safety, taking a bullet in the shoulder in the process. Jack had saved not just his life that day, but the thousands of lives Hayes would go on to save as a surgeon. The nurse returned with Emily's file, snapping Hayes back to the present. His hand shook as he opened it. 9 years old. Congenital heart defect. Required immediate surgery. The local hospital's refusal of treatment made his blood boil. All those years ago, Jack hadn't asked who Hayes was, what his politics were, or if he could afford to save him. He'd simply acted, risking everything for a stranger's life. Hayes picked up his phone, dialing Jack's number with determined fingers. The line clicked. "Hello?" Jack's voice was rough with exhaustion. "Jack." Hayes had to clear his throat. "This is Dr. Jonathan Hayes. I apologize for our call being disconnected earlier. Dr. Hayes, please." The desperation in Jack's voice was unbearable. "Listen to me, Jack." Hayes sat up straighter, his voice firm. "I don't know if you remember me, but 15 years ago, in Kandahar, the convoy attack." Jack finished quietly. "Of course I remember you, Doc." Hayes pressed his free hand against his eyes, fighting back tears. "You saved my life that day. Took a bullet for me. And now," he drew a shaky breath, "now your daughter needs help, and some bureaucrats are telling you no? They say without insurance." "To hell with insurance," Hayes cut in. "I'm going to perform that surgery myself, Jack. I'll fly out there tonight if I have to." The line went silent. Then Hayes heard it, the muffled sound of Jack Miller, the strongest man he'd ever known, weeping. "Thank you," Jack managed between breaths. "Doc, I don't know how to—" "Don't thank me," Hayes said firmly. "I owe you everything, Jack. Every life I've saved since that day is because of you. And now it's my turn to save someone precious to you." He could hear Jack trying to compose himself on the other end. Hayes continued, his voice gentle but determined. "We're going to fix your little girl's heart, Jack, whatever it takes." The silence that followed was filled with the weight of both men's emotions, one father's desperate relief, and one doctor's chance at repaying a debt he'd carried for 15 years. "I'm going to make some calls right now," Hayes said. "Get everything in motion. You just stay with Emily." I'll be in touch within the hour with the details. Doc. Jack's voice was barely a whisper. I never expected, never asked. I know you didn't, Hayes replied softly. That's exactly why you deserve this. Hold on, Jack. Help is coming. Morning sunlight streamed through the hospital room's window, casting a warm glow across Emily's bed. Jack stirred the lukewarm oatmeal in a plastic bowl, trying to make it look more appealing. Emily sat propped up against her pillows, her stuffed bunny Mr. Hoppy clutched tightly to her chest. Despite her pale complexion, her blue eyes sparkled with life. Here comes the airplane! Jack made swooping motions with the spoon, just like he used to when Emily was younger. It still made her giggle. Dad, I'm 9 now, she protested weakly, but her smile widened. Jack's heart ached at how small she looked in the oversized hospital bed, with tubes and wires surrounding her like a complicated web. But today, he had good news. Real hope. Princess, remember how I was on the phone yesterday? Jack set the oatmeal aside and perched on the edge of her bed. Well, I got in touch with a very special doctor. One of the best heart doctors in the whole country. Emily's fingers tightened around Mr. Hoppy's worn ears. Really? Really. And guess what? He knows me from when I was in the army. Jack's voice grew soft. Actually, I helped him once, a long time ago, and now he wants to help you. Emily's face lit up like a sunrise. Is he going to fix my heart, Daddy? That's the plan, sweetheart. Jack smoothed her tangled brown hair. His name is Dr. Hayes, and he's coming specially to help you. Mr. Hoppy says that's amazing. Emily made her stuffed bunny dance in excitement. Did you hear that, Mr. Hoppy? We're getting help from Daddy's friend. Meanwhile, across town at Metropolitan General Hospital, Dr. Jonathan Hayes straightened his tie for the 3rd time as he waited outside the boardroom. His usually steady surgeon's hands fidgeted with his presentation folder. After 30 years of medical practice, few things made him nervous anymore. But this meeting was different. The boardroom doors opened and a secretary ushered him in. 8 people in expensive suits sat around a polished mahogany table, their faces impassive. Hayes recognized most of them. Administrators, lawyers, and financial officers who rarely set foot in the actual hospital wards. Dr. Hayes, Barbara Chen, the board chairwoman, gestured to an empty chair. Please explain why you've called this emergency meeting. Hayes took a deep breath and opened his folder. I'm here about Emily Miller, a 9-year-old patient with severe cardiac complications requiring immediate surgery. I'm requesting approval to perform the procedure here at Metro General. We've reviewed the preliminary paperwork, Chen interrupted, glancing at her tablet. The family has insufficient insurance coverage and no means to pay. Why should we take on this liability? Hayes leaned forward. Because this child will die without the surgery. And because her father, Jack Miller, is a decorated veteran who saved my life in Afghanistan. His voice grew passionate. I'm offering to perform the surgery pro bono. My entire team has volunteered their time. Noble but irrelevant, said Richard Morton, the hospital's legal counsel. The liability issues extend beyond surgical costs, post-operative care, potential complications, insurance documentation. The risk to the hospital is substantial. We're talking about a child's life, Hayes insisted, spreading Emily's medical charts across the table. Look at these readings. Her heart is failing. We have a narrow window for successful intervention. Dr. Hayes, Chen's voice was cold. Your emotional attachment to this case is clouding your judgment. This hospital cannot set a precedent of providing complex procedures without proper financial clearance. Proper financial clearance? Hayes stood up, his chair scraping back. I've brought millions in grant money to this hospital. I've performed groundbreaking surgeries that put us on the map. I'm asking for one case, one child. The board's decision is final. Morton stated flatly. Without proper insurance coverage or payment guarantee, we cannot approve this surgery. Hayes looked around the table, meeting each person's eyes. Some looked away, uncomfortable. Others stared back with bureaucratic indifference. You're condemning a child to death over paperwork. That will be all, Dr. Hayes. Chen dismissed him with a wave of her hand. Hayes stormed out of the boardroom, his footsteps echoing down the empty corridor. His hands were shaking, not from age or fatigue, but from fury. He'd never felt so helpless in his own hospital. Late that night, after hours of pacing his office and making calls that led nowhere, Hayes picked up his phone. The clock on his wall showed 11:42 p.m. He knew Jack would be waiting for news, probably still sitting beside Emily's bed. Hayes's fingers hovered over the keypad. In all his years of medicine, this was one of the hardest calls he'd ever had to make. Finally, he dialed. Jack answered on the first ring. "Dr. Hayes?" Hayes closed his eyes, hearing the hope in Jack's voice. "Jack, I'm sorry. They won't let me operate." He paused, his throat tight. The board refused to approve the surgery without financial clearance. The silence on the other end was deafening. Hayes could almost see Jack trying to process this news, sitting in that dim hospital room, watching his daughter sleep. "But I'm not giving up," Hayes added firmly, gripping the phone tighter. "I'm not giving up." The morning air carried a hint of autumn as Jack wheeled Emily's chair through the hospital's garden path. Crisp leaves crunched under the wheels, and marigolds bobbed their orange heads in the gentle breeze. Emily had begged to go outside, and the nurses had agreed it might do her good, as long as they stayed close to the building. "Look, Daddy," Emily pointed to a butterfly landing on a nearby flower. "It's just like the ones Mommy used to chase with me." Her voice was soft, but her eyes lit up at the memory. Jack's throat tightened. Sarah had loved butterflies, had planted their backyard garden specifically to attract them. He squeezed Emily's shoulder gently. "The garden reminds me of home," Emily continued, hugging Mr. Hoppy closer. She looked up at Jack, her face serious despite her young age. "God will help us, Daddy. I know He will send people to help." Jack knelt beside the wheelchair, adjusting the blanket across Emily's legs. "How can you be so sure, Princess?" "Because," she said simply, "He always does. Remember when I was scared about starting school? He sent Mrs. Thompson to be my teacher, and she's the nicest ever." Jack smiled, marveling at his daughter's unwavering faith. Even now, facing something so enormous, she remained certain everything would work out. Her trust made him feel both inspired and inadequate. Back in Emily's room, while she napped, Jack pulled out his phone and a crumpled list of numbers. His Army buddy had suggested reaching out to local veteran groups. With trembling fingers, Jack dialed the first number. "Veteran Support Alliance. This is Mike speaking." Jack cleared his throat. "My name is Jack Miller. I'm a veteran, and I need help." The words felt like rocks in his mouth, but he forced them out. "My daughter needs heart surgery, but the hospital board won't approve it, even though we have a surgeon willing to do it for free." There was a pause on the other end. "Did you say Miller? Sergeant Jack Miller?" "Yes, that's right. From the 82nd Airborne? The one who saved that medical unit in Kandahar?" Jack shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, but that's not—" "Say no more, Sergeant. We take care of our own. Give me the details." For the next hour, Jack made call after call. Each conversation became a little easier than the last. Some people remembered him from his service, others were simply outraged at the situation. Word spread quickly through the veteran community. By early afternoon, his phone started ringing with calls from local news stations. A reporter from Channel 5 wanted to interview him. The story was catching fire. "Mr. Miller?" A nurse poked her head into Emily's room. "There are some people from your neighborhood here to see you." In the hospital lobby, Jack found Mrs. Henderson from across the street, along with several other familiar faces from his block. They carried casseroles, hand-drawn cards from their children, and determined expressions. "Jack Miller? Why didn't you tell us?" Mrs. Henderson demanded, pulling him into a tight hug. "We've been wondering why we hadn't seen Emily playing outside lately. I didn't want to burden anyone," Jack admitted. "Nonsense." Mr. Rodriguez, who owned the local bakery, stepped forward. "Emily is everyone's favorite customer. We're here to help." They told him they'd started a social media campaign. People were already sharing Emily's story, expressing outrage at the hospital board's cold-hearted decision. Mrs. Henderson's daughter, a law student, was researching patient rights violations. Jack felt overwhelmed by their support, yet a small voice in his head wondered if it would be enough to sway the hospital board. He thought of Emily's absolute certainty that help would come, and tried to hold on to that faith. As evening approached, Jack was returning from the cafeteria with a cup of coffee when he heard familiar boots clicking on the hospital's linoleum floor. In the lobby stood 5 veterans in civilian clothes, but their military bearing was unmistakable. The leader, a tall man with graying hair and ramrod-straight posture, stepped forward. "Sergeant Miller," he said, offering a crisp salute. "Colonel James Brighton, retired. These are some of my brothers from various units." The others nodded in greeting. "At ease, sir," Jack responded automatically. then felt awkward about giving a command to a superior officer. Brighton smiled. "No rank here, Jack. We're just fellow soldiers looking out for one of our own." His expression grew serious. "We heard about your daughter, about what this hospital is trying to pull." "The situation is complicated," Jack started, but Brighton cut him off. "No, it's not. They're letting red tape stand in the way of saving a child's life, a veteran's child. That's not complicated, that's wrong." The others murmured in agreement. A shorter man with a Marine Corps tattoo spoke up. "We're here to stand with you, brother, however long it takes." "We've got more coming," another added. Word spreading through every VFW hall in 3 counties. Jack looked at these men, strangers who were willing to fight for his daughter simply because they shared the bond of service. Emily's words from the garden echoed in his mind. "God will send help." "I don't know what to say," Jack managed, his voice rough with emotion. Brighton clasped his shoulder. "You don't need to say anything. We've got your 6, Jack, just like you had ours over there." The group moved to the lobby's seating area, forming a quiet but visible presence. Jack watched as they settled in, some pulling out phones to make calls, others speaking in low voices about logistics and schedules. They were organizing, planning, treating this like a mission. A young nurse passing by did a double take at the gathering of veterans, then hurried toward the administration offices. Jack knew the hospital board would soon hear about their new visitors. He thought about Emily upstairs, peaceful in her sleep, unaware of the forces gathering to help her. The sunrise painted the hospital parking lot in shades of pink and gold. Jack stood at Emily's window, his breath catching at the sight below. A dozen veterans stood in neat formation, American flags held high against the morning sky. Some wore parts of their old uniforms, others civilian clothes. But all stood straight-backed and resolute. Emily stirred in her hospital bed, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "What's that noise, Daddy?" Jack helped her sit up, adjusting her pillows. Together, they looked out the 3rd-floor window. Below, more veterans were arriving, their quiet voices carrying up through the crisp morning air. "Those are my brothers," Jack explained softly. "Fellow soldiers who understand what it means to leave no one behind." Emily's pale face brightened. "They came to help us?" She pressed her small hands against the glass, her eyes shining with wonder. Mr. Hoppy, her stuffed bunny, sat propped in her lap, his floppy ears touching the window. "They sure did, sweetheart." Jack's voice was husky with emotion. A local news van pulled into the parking lot, its satellite dish gleaming in the morning light. A reporter in a blue blazer stepped out, already speaking into her microphone. Jack recognized her from Channel 5's evening news. "Look, Daddy, we're going to be on TV." Emily's excitement made her cheeks flush pink, the most color they'd shown in days. Throughout the morning, the crowd grew. People from town began arriving with thermoses of coffee and boxes of donuts for the veterans. Someone set up a folding table with a sign that read, "Support Emily Miller." Cards and small gifts began piling up. The nurses seemed to take special notice. Sarah, the morning shift nurse, spent extra time braiding Emily's hair and telling her stories. When she checked Emily's vitals, she slipped her an extra pudding cup with a wink. "My brother's a veteran too," she whispered to Jack. "What they're doing to your family isn't right." By midday, Emily's room was filling with cards and small gifts from strangers. A local church group sent a handmade quilt covered in butterflies. A children's art class made a banner with painted handprints and get well messages. The walls bloomed with color and hope. Jack's phone buzzed constantly with messages of support. His old Army buddy had posted their story on veteran forums, and it was spreading like wildfire. People from across the country were calling the hospital, demanding they approve Emily's surgery. "Mr. Miller?" A different nurse poked her head in. "There's a donation page set up for Emily. It's already raised $10,000. Jack sank into the chair beside Emily's bed, overwhelmed. He'd always been the one helping others, the one people counted on. Accepting help felt foreign, almost uncomfortable. But looking at Emily's glowing face, he knew this wasn't just about him. Through the afternoon, more news crews arrived. The veterans maintained their vigil, rotating shifts so someone was always standing guard. Their presence sent a clear message. This child would not be forgotten. Emily dozed off and on, but insisted on staying by the window when she was awake. She waved to people below, her smile brightening whenever someone waved back. Despite her fatigue, her spirit seemed stronger than ever. "Daddy," she said during one quiet moment. "Remember when you told me about your army family? How you all looked out for each other?" Jack nodded, stroking her hair. "I think they're still looking out for you. And now they're looking out for me, too." As evening approached, someone in the crowd below started singing Amazing Grace. More voices joined in, the harmony rising up through the gathering dusk. Emily listened with her eyes closed. "Mister," Hoppy clutched to her chest. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Hospital shift changes brought new faces, but the steady stream of support didn't waver. People set up battery-operated candles in the parking lot, creating a field of tiny twinkling lights. When night finally fell, Jack helped Emily get ready for bed. She was tired but happy, her eyes bright with something more than fever. As he tucked the butterfly quilt around her shoulders, she caught his hand. "Daddy, see, we're not alone." Her voice was soft but sure. Looking at his daughter's peaceful face, surrounded by evidence of so much love from strangers, Jack felt something hard in his chest begin to soften. They weren't alone. They never had been. Dr. Jonathan Hayes paced in his office, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the Venetian blinds, creating bars of light across his desk. 5 of his most trusted medical professionals sat before him, their expressions a mix of concern and determination. "I know what I'm asking is unprecedented," Hayes said, his voice low but firm. He stopped pacing and leaned against his desk, his weathered hands gripping the polished wood. "But that little girl needs us." Dr. Sarah Chen, his best anesthesiologist, straightened in her chair. "Just to be clear, you want us to prepare for an unauthorized surgery?" Hayes nodded, running a hand through his silver hair. "Emily Miller's condition is deteriorating. We're talking about a 9-year-old whose only crime is being born with a heart condition into a family that can't afford care." His voice cracked slightly. "Her father saved my life in combat. I wouldn't be standing here if it wasn't for him." Nurse Rodriguez, a veteran of countless surgeries, folded her arms. "The board will have our licenses if they find out." "I understand the risks," Hayes replied. "I'm not asking anyone to participate who isn't willing, but I can't stand by and watch bureaucracy kill this child." The room fell silent. Through the window, they could hear the distant chants of veterans still protesting in the parking lot. The sound seemed to fill the heavy quiet of the office. Dr. Wilson, a young cardiac specialist, leaned forward. "How would we even do this? We can't just wheel a patient into OR without paperwork." Hayes moved to a whiteboard and uncapped a marker. "That's why I called you all here. We need to plan this perfectly." He began drawing a rough timeline. "First, we need to coordinate with the night shift staff who support us. Rodriguez, can you handle that?" The nurse nodded firmly. "Many of them already want to help. They've seen Emily. That child has a way of touching hearts." "Good." Hayes continued writing. "We'll need to prep an OR without raising suspicion. Chen, you'll need to verify all equipment beforehand, but discreetly. Wilson, you'll assist me during surgery. Parker, you'll monitor post-op care." Dr. Parker, an ICU specialist, raised her hand. "What about records? We can't perform surgery without documentation." "I've thought about that," Hayes replied. "We'll prepare everything as if it's a scheduled emergency procedure. The paperwork will be ready, just not filed until the last possible moment. By then, we'll be too far in for them to stop us." The group spent the next hour working out details, timing, equipment needs, contingency plans. Hayes watched his team's initial hesitation transform into purposeful determination. They were good people, he knew. Doctors and nurses who had entered medicine to save lives, not to serve corporate interests. A soft knock interrupted their planning. Hayes opened the door to find Jack Miller standing there, looking exhausted but resolute. "Come in, Jack," Hayes said, ushering him inside. "Everyone, this is Jack Miller." The medical team looked at Jack with newfound understanding. Here was the man who had saved their chief surgeon, the father, fighting for his daughter's life. Jack nodded to them, his military bearing evident even in his fatigue. "We have a plan," Hayes told him, placing a steady hand on Jack's shoulder. "Tomorrow morning, before dawn. But Jack, this is crucial. You can't tell anyone, not even Emily yet. The fewer people who know, the better our chances." Jack's eyes moved from face to face in the room. "You're all risking your careers for my daughter?" "We're doing what's right," Dr. Chen said simply. "Just keep Emily's spirits up," Nurse Rodriguez added. We'll handle the rest. They spent another 30 minutes going over what Jack needed to know. When to have Emily ready, what to tell the night nurses, how to act normal despite knowing what was coming. Hayes watched Jack absorb every detail with military precision, asking clarifying questions, understanding the importance of timing and discretion. As the meeting wound down, the team dispersed gradually to avoid drawing attention. Hayes walked Jack to the elevator, speaking quietly. "Get some rest tonight," Hayes advised. "Tomorrow will be intense." Jack's voice was rough with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you all." "Thank me by being strong for Emily," Hayes replied. "And Jack? I know it's hard, but try to act normal. The wrong word to the wrong person could derail everything." The elevator arrived with a soft ding. Jack stepped inside, his shoulders straight despite the weight he carried. Hayes watched the doors close, praying they would all have the strength for what lay ahead. Back in Emily's room, Jack found his daughter sitting up in bed, drawing pictures. Colored pencils were scattered across her blanket, and her stuffed bunny sat propped against the pillow. She looked up with a smile that made his heart ache. "Look, Daddy," she said, holding up her drawing. "I made this for Dr. Hayes." Jack moved closer to see a childish but sweet rendering of a doctor with angel wings. The simple faith in her artwork nearly undid him. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," he managed, sitting on the edge of her bed. "I'm sure he'll love it." Emily worked on her drawing for a while longer as Jack watched the sunset paint the sky outside her window. When she finally grew tired, he helped her put away the pencils and tucked her blanket around her shoulders. "Daddy," she murmured sleepily, "do you think the angels are watching over us?" Jack bent down and kissed her forehead, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. "I know they are, baby," he whispered. "Tomorrow may change everything." He straightened up, watching as her eyes drifted closed, her small face peaceful in sleep. Outside her room, the hospital corridors were quieting for the night. Somewhere in the building, Hayes and his team were making final preparations. Jack sat in the chair beside Emily's bed, listening to the soft beep of monitors and the distant sounds of the hospital at night. Tomorrow would indeed change everything one way or another. The hospital basement hummed with fluorescent lights and the soft whir of medical equipment. Dr. Hayes wiped his forehead with his sleeve as he directed his small team of trusted nurses and technicians. They worked quickly and quietly, transforming the dusty storage area into a makeshift surgical prep room. "Sarah, set up the EKG machine in that corner," Hayes whispered to a veteran nurse. "Tom, we need the ultrasound card over here." His hands trembled slightly as he arranged surgical tools on a metal tray, each instrument catching the harsh overhead light. The basement wasn't ideal, but it was their only option. Ancient pipes ran along the ceiling, and the concrete walls held decades of paint layers, yet the space was clean enough, and more importantly, it was far from the prying eyes of hospital administration. "Dr. Hayes?" A young nurse named Rachel appeared at his elbow. "Security does their rounds down here at 8 p.m. and 2 a.m. We'll have a 40-minute window between shifts." Hayes nodded, checking his watch. "Good work. How's the back entrance?" "Clear. The maintenance staff helped us disable the alarm on the service door. They're on our side." Rachel smiled, adjusting her scrub cap. The sound of careful footsteps on the stairs made everyone freeze. Hayes held his breath until he recognized Jack's familiar gait. The veteran appeared, carrying Emily in his arms. She wore her favorite pink pajamas, her stuffed bunny clutched tight against her chest. "Sorry, we're a little late," Jack whispered. "Had to wait for shift change upstairs." Emily looked around the basement with wide eyes, taking in the unusual setting. "It's like a secret clubhouse," she said, her voice bright with childhood wonder. Hayes couldn't help but smile. "That's exactly what it is, sweetheart. Our special medical clubhouse." He approached them, his stethoscope ready. "Mind if I take a listen to your heart?" Emily nodded eagerly. Jack set her down on the examination table they'd prepared, keeping one hand on her back for support. The paper crinkled beneath her as she settled. "Your bunny might want to listen too," Hayes suggested, offering the earpieces to the stuffed animal first. Emily giggled, the sound echoing softly in the basement. As Hayes performed his examination, the team moved efficiently around them. They took Emily's vital signs, drew blood samples, and conducted preliminary tests. Through it all, Emily remained cheerful, treating each procedure like part of an exciting game. "You're being so brave," Jack murmured, squeezing her hand. His eyes met Hayes's over Emily's head, filled with equal measures of gratitude and anxiety. Hayes understood the weight of that look. This wasn't just about performing a surgery. It was about defying the entire hospital system, risking careers, and breaking rules to save a life that bureaucracy had deemed unworthy of saving. "Dr. Hayes?" Emily's small voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Will you tell me a story while you work? Daddy always tells me stories when I'm scared." Hayes pulled up a rolling stool, settling beside her. "Did you know your daddy is one of the bravest men I've ever met?" He began drawing blood as he talked, distracting her with tales of her father's heroism, carefully edited for young ears. Jack stood straighter, uncomfortable with the praise, but unwilling to interrupt as Emily listened with shining eyes. The basement felt less clinical somehow, transformed by a child's imagination and trust. Time passed quickly as they completed the necessary preparations. Emily yawned, fighting to keep her eyes open as the evening wore on. Jack scooped her up again, her head resting heavily on his shoulder. "Everything looks good," Hayes confirmed, reviewing the test results. "Her numbers are stable enough for tomorrow." He placed a gentle hand on Jack's arm. "By this time tomorrow, she'll be safe." The promise hung in the air between them, weighted with everything left unsaid. The risks they were taking, the rules they were breaking, and the desperate hope they all shared. Jack nodded, holding Emily closer as though he could protect her from the world through sheer force of will. The basement team began quietly packing away their equipment, erasing all evidence of their secret preparations. They moved like shadows, each person knowing their role in this carefully choreographed dance of defiance. Emily stirred slightly in Jack's arms. "Daddy," she mumbled sleepily, "can we come back to the secret clubhouse tomorrow?" "Yes, Princess," Jack whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Tomorrow's going to be a very special day." The morning sun hadn't yet touched the hospital windows when Jack wheeled Emily down the quiet hallway. Her small frame was nearly lost in the oversized hospital gown, but her eyes sparkled with hope. She clutched Mr. Whiskers, her stuffed bunny, close to her chest. "Are you scared, sweetie?" Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily shook her head, her pale face breaking into a gentle smile. "No, Daddy. Dr. Hayes is going to fix my heart. I can feel it." Jack's throat tightened as he pushed the wheelchair toward the service elevator. The basement corridor stretched before them, lit by flickering fluorescent lights that cast strange shadows on the concrete walls. The air was cooler down here, carrying the faint smell of cleaning supplies and old paper files. Dr. Hayes met them at the makeshift operating room door, his familiar presence reassuring. He wore his surgical scrubs, a mask hanging around his neck. Behind him, nurses moved purposefully, preparing instruments and checking monitors they'd secretly brought down over the past day. "Good morning, Emily," Hayes said warmly, kneeling to her level. "Ready for your big day?" "Yes, sir," Emily's voice echoed slightly in the basement corridor. "Mr. Whiskers is ready too." Hayes chuckled, but Jack noticed the tension in his shoulders. They were all taking an enormous risk, but what choice did they have? Emily's latest tests showed her condition deteriorating faster than expected. A nurse helped Emily onto the operating table, while Jack held her hand. The sheet was crisp and white against her pale skin. Medical monitors beeped steadily, their screens casting a blue glow across the room. "Daddy?" Emily's voice was small but steady. "Will you sing our special song while I fall asleep?" Jack's eyes welled with tears as he remembered how his late wife used to sing "You Are My Sunshine" to Emily every night. He cleared his throat and began softly. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." Dr. Hayes started preparing the anesthesia while Jack sang. The nurses moved efficiently around them, checking Emily's vitals and attaching monitoring leads to her chest. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. Then heavy footsteps thundered down the basement stairs. "Stop! Stop immediately!" a harsh voice commanded. Jack's song cut off as 3 security guards burst into the room, followed by 2 members of the hospital board. Their faces were masks of stern authority. "This unauthorized procedure ends now," declared Mrs. Peterson, the board's vice president. Her heels clicked sharply against the concrete floor as she strode forward. "Dr. Hayes, you are suspended effective immediately. Security, please escort the patient back to her room." "No," Hayes stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "You can't do this. This child needs surgery now. What we can't do is allow an unauthorized procedure in an unsanctioned location," Mrs. Peterson replied coldly. "The liability alone." "Liability?" Jack's voice cracked as he gripped Emily's hand tighter. My daughter's life is at stake." Emily looked around with wide, confused eyes. "Daddy, what's happening?" The security guards moved forward, their faces uncomfortable but determined. One of them reached for Emily's wheelchair as nurses protested, and Hayes argued heatedly with the board members. "Please," Jack begged, his military composure crumbling. "She needs this surgery. I'll sign anything you want. I'll take all responsibility." Mrs. Peterson's expression didn't waver. "Remove them now." The guards began disconnecting Emily's monitoring equipment despite Hayes's continued objections. Jack felt helpless as they lifted his daughter back into her wheelchair, her small body trembling. "Daddy, I don't feel good," Emily whispered, her face suddenly ashen. They were escorted upstairs like criminals, the security guards flanking them while Hayes shouted behind them about medical ethics and moral responsibility. Emily's breathing grew more labored with each floor they climbed. Back in Emily's room, the regular hospital staff rushed to reconnect her to the monitors. The readings they saw made them exchange worried glances. Jack sank into the chair beside Emily's bed, his legs no longer able to support him. The morning sun now streamed through the window, but its warmth couldn't touch the cold despair that gripped his heart. Emily's lips had taken on a bluish tinge, and her breathing came in short, desperate gasps. "I need a crash cart in here," a nurse called out, and Jack's world began to spin. He reached for Emily's hand, now cold and limp in his grasp. The monitor's beeping became more urgent as his daughter's condition deteriorated before his eyes. Medical staff rushed around them, their voices becoming a blur of technical terms and urgent commands. Jack sat there, devastated and helpless, watching the only light left in his world grow dimmer. The chair beneath him might as well have been made of quicksand, pulling him down into depths of despair he hadn't felt since losing his wife. A nurse touched his shoulder gently. "Sir, we need you to step back so we can work." Jack moved his chair to the corner, his legs wooden, his heart shattering. He watched as they worked on his little girl, each moment feeling like an eternity. The morning sun continued its climb into the sky, indifferent to the tragedy unfolding beneath it. Emily's monitors screamed their warning as her condition worsened. Through his tears, Jack could see Mr. Whiskers, her stuffed bunny, lying forgotten on the floor where it had fallen in the chaos. He picked it up with trembling hands, clutching it to his chest as his world crumbled around him. The chapel's stained-glass windows cast no light in the darkness of night. Only the soft red glow of the eternal flame near the altar provided any illumination. Jack Miller sat alone in the back pew, his broad shoulders hunched forward, his calloused hands clasped so tight his knuckles had turned white. The wooden pew creaked as he shifted his weight. The sound echoed in the empty chapel, reminding him just how alone he was. His military boots, still carrying traces of dried mud from the hospital garden, scuffed against the worn carpet. "Sarah," he whispered his late wife's name into the darkness. "I don't know what to do anymore." The memory of that terrible night 3 years ago crashed over him like a wave. Sarah, pale and thin in her hospital bed, squeezing his hand with what little strength she had left. Her last words still haunted him. "Promise me you'll take care of our baby girl." Jack pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, fighting back tears. He'd made that promise without hesitation, believing that his strength, his determination, his love would be enough. But now, sitting in this quiet chapel, he felt completely powerless. His mind drifted to his time overseas, to the battles he'd fought. He remembered the weight of his rifle, the trust of his fellow soldiers, the clarity of purpose that came with each mission. Even in the worst firefights, there had always been something he could do, some action he could take. "I saved lives over there," he muttered, his voice rough with emotion. "I pulled men from burning vehicles. I carried wounded soldiers through gunfire." His hands began to shake. "But I can't save my own daughter." The chapel's silence seemed to mock him. Where was God now? Where was the divine intervention that Emily so firmly believed in? His little girl had more faith in her small finger than he had in his entire body. Yet, here they were. A distant siren wailed somewhere in the city, reminding him of the world beyond these walls. Jack thought about the community that had rallied around them, the veterans standing vigil, the neighbors bringing food, the nurses sneaking extra care to Emily. But it hadn't been enough. The hospital board remained unmoved, and now Hayes's secret plan lay in ruins. "I should have done more," he said to the empty chapel. "Should have found a way to make more money. Should have gotten better insurance. Should have." His voice cracked. Should have noticed Emily was sick sooner. Should have somehow prevented Sarah's cancer. The weight of all these imagined failures pressed down on his shoulders like a physical burden. Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out Emily's latest drawing. Even in the dim light, he could make out the crayon figures. Him standing tall in his old army uniform, Emily next to him with a big smile, and an angel that looked suspiciously like Sarah, watching over them both. The paper trembled in his shaking hands. Hours passed as Jack sat there, lost in memories. He remembered teaching Emily to ride a bike, her delighted squeals when she finally balanced on her own. He thought about their Sunday morning pancake traditions, how she always insisted on making smiley faces with chocolate chips. Every memory was a knife to his heart, a reminder of all that stood to be lost. The chapel's ancient heating system clicked and hummed, a mechanical counterpoint to Jack's ragged breathing. Dawn began to creep in through the stained glass, painting the floor in muted colors. He hadn't slept, hadn't even tried. How could he rest when Emily's time was running out? A soft knock at the chapel door startled him. A young nurse stood in the doorway, her face grave. "Mr. Miller, Emily's having trouble breathing. We need you upstairs." Jack's legs felt like lead as he followed the nurse to Emily's room. The morning shift was just starting, the hallways filling with the usual bustle of hospital routine. But nothing felt routine about watching his daughter struggle for each breath. They had put her on oxygen while he was gone. The clear plastic mask seemed enormous against her small face. Her chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow movements. Mr. Whiskers, her constant companion, had slipped from her grasp and lay forgotten at her side. Dr. Stevens, the overnight physician, stood by Emily's bed reviewing her charts. He was an older man with kind eyes and gray hair at his temples. When he saw Jack, he gestured for him to step into the hallway. "Mr. Miller?" The doctor's voice was gentle but carried the weight of bad news. "Emily's heart is struggling more than ever. The strain is affecting her lungs now." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Without intervention, she may not last the week." Jack stood perfectly still, his military training kicking in, keeping him upright when his world was crumbling. Through the door's window, he could see Emily's small form in the hospital bed, dwarfed by medical equipment. The morning sun caught her hair, creating a golden halo on her pillow, so much like her mother's. The doctor placed a sympathetic hand on Jack's shoulder, but Jack barely felt it. All he could focus on was his daughter's labored breathing, each rise and fall of her chest, a reminder of how precious and precarious life had become. The steady beep of the heart monitor filled the dim hospital room. Jack sat in the hard plastic chair beside Emily's bed, his body aching from hours of keeping vigil. The night shift had begun, and the hallway lights were dimmed, casting long shadows across the floor. Emily lay small and fragile against the white hospital sheets, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths beneath the oxygen mask. Her favorite stuffed bunny, worn from years of love, rested in the crook of her arm. Her skin was pale, almost translucent in the artificial light, making the dark circles under her eyes more pronounced. Jack leaned forward, gently brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. The gesture stirred her, and her eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on his face. Even now, weak as she was, she managed a tiny smile that made his heart clench. "Hey, Princess," he whispered, forcing his voice to stay steady. "How are you feeling?" Emily's hand moved slightly on the blanket, reaching for his. Jack quickly wrapped his larger hand around her small one, careful of the IV line. Her fingers felt cool against his palm. "Daddy," she said, her voice barely audible through the oxygen mask. Each word seemed to cost her precious energy. "Don't be sad." Jack swallowed hard, trying to hide the tremor in his voice. "I'm not sad, sweetheart. I'm right here with you." Emily's eyes, so much like her mother's, held a wisdom that squeezed his heart. "It's okay," she whispered. "Daddy, faith is believing even when you can't see." The simple truth in her words hit him like a physical blow. His vision blurred as tears welled up, and he bowed his head, unable to hold them back any longer. They fell onto the white hospital blanket, leaving dark spots on the fabric. His shoulders shook with silent sobs as he clutched her tiny hand. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I promised to protect you, and I—" A slight pressure from her fingers stopped him. Despite her weakness, she still tried to comfort him, just like Sarah would have done. A soft tap at the window drew his attention. At first, he thought it was rain, but when he looked up, he saw something that made him catch his breath. A warm, golden light flickered against the glass. Rising slowly, careful not to let go of Emily's hand, Jack moved closer to the window. What he saw made his heart skip a beat. The hospital parking lot, usually dark at this hour, was alive with light. Hundreds of people stood in the cold night air, each holding a candle that glowed like a star fallen to earth. Veterans stood at attention in their uniforms, the candlelight reflecting off their medals and insignias. Families huddled together, parents lifting small children to see better. Hospital staff who weren't on duty joined the crowd, their scrubs visible in the sea of faces. Neighbors he recognized stood shoulder to shoulder with strangers who had heard their story and come to show support. The light from all those candles pushed back the darkness, creating a warm glow that seemed to embrace the entire hospital. Some people held signs, "We stand with Emily. Support our veterans. Love conquers all." The sight blurred again as fresh tears filled Jack's eyes, but these were different from before. "Emily," he said softly. "Look what's happening outside." She turned her head slightly, her eyes widening at the sight. A small sound escaped her, something between a gasp and a laugh. "Angels," she whispered. "No, sweetheart," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. "Those are people. Real people who care about you, who are standing with us." As if in response to his words, more people joined the crowd. Cars pulled into the parking lot, their headlights sweeping across the scene before going dark. New points of light appeared as more candles were lit, passed from person to person like a spreading wave of hope. Jack watched as Hayes moved through the crowd in his white coat, speaking quietly to different groups. Other medical staff did the same, their faces determined in the flickering light. The veteran who had stood guard in the lobby for days raised his candle in a silent salute when he caught Jack's eye. The sight transformed something in Jack's chest. The crushing weight of despair that had pressed down on him began to lift, replaced by a fierce determination. All these people hadn't given up. They stood in the cold night air, holding their lights against the darkness, refusing to accept defeat. Emily's words echoed in his mind. Faith is believing even when you can't see. He might not be able to see the path forward yet, but he wasn't walking it alone. An entire community stood with them, their combined light strong enough to pierce any darkness. He squeezed Emily's hand gently, feeling her weak but present grip in return. "Get some rest, princess," he said softly. "Daddy's not giving up. Not now. Not ever." The candlelight continued to flicker against the window, casting warm shadows across Emily's peaceful face as she drifted back to sleep. Jack remained standing, his back straight, his jaw set with renewed purpose as he watched the sea of lights below. The battle wasn't over, and this time, he had an army behind him. The morning sun cast long shadows across the hospital's manicured lawn as Jack stepped through the sliding glass doors. He stopped abruptly, his breath catching in his throat. Where yesterday there had been only a handful of supporters, now hundreds of people packed the grounds. Veterans stood in neat rows, many in full uniform, their medals glinting in the early light. Families with children held handmade signs. Townspeople he'd known for years stood shoulder to shoulder with complete strangers. Their voices rose in unison, a steady chant that made the glass walls vibrate. "Save Emily! Save Emily!" Jack's legs felt weak. He gripped the metal railing of the entrance ramp, steadying himself. Mrs. Peterson from the grocery store spotted him and waved, her eyes bright with determination. Next to her, his old high school teacher held a sign that read, "Veterans deserve better." News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky. Reporters with microphones interviewed people in the crowd, their cameras capturing the growing protest. Jack recognized the logos of not just local stations, but national networks. "Quite a sight, isn't it?" A familiar voice spoke behind him. Jack turned to find Dr. Hayes, looking tired but determined in his white coat. The chief surgeon's eyes scanned the crowd with a mixture of pride and amazement. "I've never seen anything like this," Jack said, his voice rough with emotion. "Neither has the board," Hayes replied with a hint of satisfaction. "They've been in emergency meetings since dawn. The governor's office called 30 minutes ago, demanding answers." A group of veterans near the front noticed Jack and snapped to attention, rendering crisp salutes. Jack automatically straightened and returned their salutes, fighting back tears. These were men and women he'd never met, yet they stood here for his daughter. "Mr. Miller!" A reporter hurried toward him, microphone extended. "How do you respond to the overwhelming show of support? What message do you have for the hospital board?" Before Jack could answer, more reporters surrounded him. Camera lights clicked on, creating a bright circle in the morning shadows. Jack felt Hayes' steadying hand on his shoulder. "My daughter Emily," Jack began, his voice growing stronger, "is fighting for her life up there. She's 9 years old. She loves butterflies and drawing pictures. She never complains, even when she's hurting. All she needs is surgery. Surgery that Dr. Hayes has offered to perform for free." But the hospital board. He had to pause, swallowing hard. The board would rather let her die than bend their rules. The reporters leaned in closer, their expressions intense. Behind them, the crowd had gone quiet, listening. "I serve this country," Jack continued. "I watched good men and women give everything for what's right. Now I'm asking this hospital to do what's right. Not just for Emily, but for every family that might face this situation." A cheer went up from the crowd. Jack saw veterans wiping their eyes, mothers hugging their children closer. The chanting started again, louder than before. "Save Emily! Save Emily!" Inside the hospital's top floor, Jack could see figures moving frantically behind the boardroom's glass walls. Phone calls were being made, papers shuffled, heads shaking in animated discussion. Hayes pulled Jack aside, away from the cameras. "The board's in chaos," he said in a low voice. "Their legal team is warning them about discrimination lawsuits." "The PR nightmare is just beginning," he smiled grimly. "And I've been in touch with a friend at the American Civil Liberties Union. They're very interested in taking this case." For the first time in days, Jack felt something other than despair. It wasn't quite hope. He wouldn't let himself hope too much yet, but it was a spark of possibility. "What are our chances?" he asked quietly. Hayes watched another news van pull up to the curb. "The board cares about two things, money and reputation. Right now, they're losing both." He turned to Jack, his expression serious. "We might be able to force their hand legally. Emergency injunctions, discrimination suits. There are options. It won't be quick, but Emily has a fighting chance," Jack finished, his voice barely above a whisper. The chief surgeon nodded, his eyes bright with determination. "A real fighting chance, Jack. And look around. You've got an army behind you now." The morning sun climbed higher, warming the cool air. The crowd continued to grow as more people arrived, carrying coffee and donuts for the veterans standing guard. Children drew chalk messages of hope on the sidewalk. Local restaurants began delivering food to the protesters. Jack looked up at Emily's window, where a nurse had positioned her bed so she could see the gathering below. Even from here, he could make out her small face pressed against the glass, her oxygen mask fogging the pain. She raised her hand in a weak wave to the crowd. Hundreds of hands waved back. Dr. Hayes' silver Lexus cut through the morning traffic, its emergency flashers blinking steadily. Jack sat in the passenger seat, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, knuckles white with tension. His army uniform, carefully pressed the night before, felt stiff against his skin. "Judge Carter has a reputation for fairness," Hayes said, his voice steady and reassuring. "She's known for cutting through red tape when lives are at stake." Jack nodded, unable to find his voice. The weight of Emily's life pressed down on his shoulders. In his mind's eye, he could see her lying in that hospital bed, getting weaker by the hour. The courthouse loomed ahead, a stern limestone building with wide steps leading to brass doors. Television crews had already gathered, their cameras tracking Hayes' car as it pulled into a reserved space. "Ready?" Hayes asked, turning off the engine. "No choice but to be," Jack replied, squaring his shoulders. The military posture came naturally, a shield against his fear. They climbed the courthouse steps together, passing through security and following a court officer down marble hallways. Their footsteps echoed in the quiet corridor. The officer led them to a large courtroom with dark wooden panels and high windows. Judge Evelyn Carter sat behind her bench, her silver hair neat, her expression alert and focused. She wore her black robes with dignity, but her eyes held warmth as she watched Jack and Hayes enter. "Emergency petition in the matter of Emily Miller," the clerk announced. Jack stood at attention before the bench, his training taking over. Judge Carter studied him carefully, noting his combat medals and the worry lines etched deep around his eyes. "Mr. Miller, she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Please tell me about your daughter." Jack swallowed hard. "Emily is 9 years old, Your Honor. She has a congenital heart condition that requires immediate surgery. Without it." His voice cracked slightly. "Without it, the doctors say she won't make it through the week." "And you served our country?" Judge Carter leaned forward slightly. "Yes, Your Honor. 3 tours in Afghanistan. Special Forces." Jack's voice strengthened as he spoke of his service. "I was decorated for actions that saved my unit, including Dr. Hayes here." Hayes stepped forward then, his presence commanding attention. "Your Honor, I owe Jack Miller my life. When our convoy was hit, he pulled me from burning wreckage under heavy fire. Now his daughter needs surgery that I am qualified and willing to perform, but hospital bureaucracy stands in our way." Judge Carter's eyes narrowed. "Explain the hospital's position." Hayes outlined the board's refusal, their concerns about liability, their insistence on upfront payment despite his willingness to operate pro bono. As he spoke, Judge Carter's expression grew increasingly stern. "And this child's condition is deteriorating?" she asked. "Yes, Your Honor," Hayes confirmed. "Every hour we delay increases the risk." Judge Carter removed her glasses, pinching the bridge of her nose. For a moment, the courtroom was silent except for the soft whir of the air conditioning. When she looked up, her decision was written clearly on her face. "I lost my husband 3 years ago," she said quietly. "He was a veteran too. He taught me that sometimes doing what's right means cutting through the nonsense." She straightened in her chair. "Mr. Miller, does Emily have faith that this surgery will help her?" Jack's throat tightened. "She never lost faith, Your Honor. Not once." Judge Carter nodded, reaching for her gavel. "Then neither shall we. I am issuing an emergency injunction requiring Memorial Hospital to allow Dr. Hayes to perform this surgery immediately. Furthermore, I am ordering them to provide all necessary support and facilities." The gavel cracked against the wood. "This court will not stand by while a child's life is threatened by administrative cowardice." The sound of cheering filtered through the courthouse windows from the crowd outside. Someone must have been watching through the window, signaling the news to those below. Jack's legs felt weak with relief. Hayes gripped his shoulder, steadying him. "Thank you, Your Honor," Jack managed to say. "Thank you." Judge Carter's eyes softened. "Go to your daughter, Mr. Miller. Tell her help is coming." They hurried from the courthouse, pushing through reporters who shouted questions. The crowd parted to let them pass, hands reaching out to pat Jack's back, voices calling encouragement. Hayes drove even faster on the return trip, lights flashing. Jack practically ran through the hospital corridors, his polished shoes squeaking on the linoleum. He burst into Emily's room, where a nurse was adjusting her oxygen. Emily's pale face lit up at the sight of him in his uniform. "Daddy?" she whispered through the oxygen mask. "You look like a hero." Jack knelt beside her bed, taking her small hand in his. "Baby girl," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're getting your surgery. Dr. Hayes is going to make you better. Right now." Emily's blue eyes filled with tears of joy. "I told you God would help," she said softly. "He just needed a little time to get everything ready." Jack leaned forward and kissed her forehead, his own tears falling freely now. Through the window, he could hear the crowd still cheering below, their voices rising like a prayer of hope into the morning sky. The operating room gleamed under harsh, fluorescent lights, a sterile sanctuary of stainless steel and medical equipment. Emily lay on the table, looking tiny and fragile in her pale blue hospital gown. Her golden hair had been tucked carefully into a surgical cap, but a few wispy strands escaped around her face. Jack leaned down, his heart aching at how small she seemed. The surgical team moved efficiently around them, checking monitors and preparing instruments, but he focused only on his daughter's face. Emily's eyes, bright despite her weakness, found his. "I'm scared, Daddy," she whispered. Jack cupped her cheek with his trembling hand. "I know, sweetheart, but Dr. Hayes is the best doctor in the whole world, and I'll be right outside praying for you the entire time. Promise you'll be there when I wake up?" "I promise." Jack's voice cracked as he pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "I love you more than anything, Emily." "Love you too, Daddy." Her smile was faint but brave. Dr. Hayes approached, already in his surgical scrubs and cap. "It's time, Jack." Jack straightened, fighting back tears. He gave Emily's hand one final squeeze before stepping back. Hayes placed a reassuring hand on Jack's shoulder, the same steady grip that had helped countless patients before. "I'll take good care of her," Hayes said softly. "She's strong, just like her father." Jack nodded, unable to speak. As he walked backward toward the door, Emily raised her hand in a tiny wave. The last thing he saw before the door swung shut was Hayes leaning over his daughter, speaking to her in gentle, confident tones. The waiting room felt like a prison cell. Jack paced the length of it, his footsteps echoing on the linoleum floor. 7 steps forward, turn, 7 steps back. The same pattern he'd walked during night watch in Afghanistan, except now the enemy wasn't insurgents, it was time itself. Every few minutes, his eyes darted to the clock on the wall. Each tick seemed to take an eternity. The surgery would take at least 6 hours, Hayes had warned him. Jack's hands wouldn't stop trembling. The familiar rhythm of his pacing transported him back to darker times. He remembered another waiting room, years ago, when the doctors had told him they couldn't save his wife. The same helplessness threatened to overwhelm him now. To keep the memories at bay, Jack whispered prayers under his breath. Some were formal ones he'd learned in church. Others were desperate pleas straight from his heart. "Please, God, please, let her live. She's all I have left." His mind drifted to another operating room. This one, a makeshift tent in the desert. Hayes had been the patient then, his life bleeding out from a sniper's bullet. Jack had held pressure on the wound for hours, talking constantly to keep Hayes conscious until help arrived. Now their roles were reversed. Hayes was the one fighting to save a life, while Jack could only wait and pray. The waiting room slowly filled with supporters. Veterans who had stood vigil outside took turns sitting with him. Nurses stopped by with coffee and gentle words of encouragement. But Jack barely registered their presence, lost in his own world of worry and memory. 3 hours in, he found himself standing at the window, staring at nothing. His reflection showed a man he barely recognized, haggard, unshaven, with dark circles under his eyes. Behind him, he could see Emily's stuffed bunny sitting in the chair where he'd left it. She'd insisted he keep it safe during her surgery. 4 hours. Jack's legs ached from pacing, but he couldn't sit still. The walls seemed to close in whenever he tried. His hands shook so badly he could barely hold his coffee cup. Every time the door opened, his heart leaped, only to sink when it wasn't Hayes. 5 hours. Jack's prayers had become a continuous loop, mixing with memories of Emily as a baby, her first steps, her first day of school. He remembered her mother's smile in every image, and it both comforted and hurt him. 5.5 hours. Jack stood at the window again, pressing his forehead against the cool glass. Below, he could see the crowd of supporters still gathered, some holding signs, others just standing in silent solidarity. The sight brought tears to his eyes. Finally, after what felt like several lifetimes, the door opened. Jack spun around to see Hayes walking toward him, still in his surgical scrubs. The doctor pulled off his mask, revealing a weary but unmistakable smile. "She made it." The words hit Jack like a physical force. His knees buckled, and Hayes quickly stepped forward to steady him. The trembling in Jack's hands spread to his entire body as relief flooded through him. "She's stable?" Jack managed to ask, his voice hoarse. "The surgery went perfectly," Hayes confirmed, his eyes bright with emotion. "Your daughter is one brave little fighter, Jack, just like her father." Emily's eyelids fluttered open slowly, like butterfly wings testing the air. The soft beeping of monitors filled the recovery room as consciousness gradually returned to her pale face. Jack sat beside her bed, his large hand gently wrapped around her small one, his shoulders shaking with silent tears of relief. "Daddy, it doesn't hurt anymore," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with wonder. Her blue eyes, though tired, sparkled with their familiar light. Jack squeezed her hand carefully, trying to speak past the lump in his throat. "That's right, sweetheart. Dr. Hayes fixed your heart." Emily's fingers weakly squeezed back. "I knew God would help us," she said with a small smile. Her stuffed bunny lay tucked against her side, carefully positioned by a thoughtful nurse to be there when she woke up. Through the window, the sounds of celebration drifted up from the street below. Jack could hear music playing. Someone had brought speakers and was playing "God Bless America." The autumn air carried the sound of hundreds of voices cheering and singing along. "What's happening outside?" Emily asked. curiosity brightening her face despite her fatigue. "Those are all the people who helped us, honey. They're celebrating because you're better now." Jack reached out to smooth a strand of hair from her forehead. "The whole town came together for you." A nurse entered, carrying a small TV remote. "Would you like to see?" she asked with a warm smile. "You're quite the celebrity, Miss Emily." When Emily nodded eagerly, the nurse turned on the wall-mounted television. The local news was showing aerial footage of the hospital grounds, where hundreds of people had gathered. Many wore military uniforms or carried American flags. Homemade banners waved in the breeze with messages like, "God bless Emily," and "Veterans stand together." "Look at all those people," Emily breathed in amazement. The news anchor's voice provided commentary. "In a victory for veterans' rights and human dignity." 9-year-old Emily Miller received her life-saving heart surgery today after a judge's emergency order compelled Memorial Hospital to proceed. The daughter of decorated Army veteran Jack Miller had been denied care due to insurance issues, leading to an unprecedented showing of community support. Dr. Hayes appeared in the doorway, still wearing his surgical scrubs but with his mask pulled down. "How's my favorite patient doing?" he asked with a warm smile. "My heart feels happy," Emily replied, making both men chuckle softly. "That's exactly what we want to hear." Hayes moved to check her vital signs, his movements gentle and precise. "Everything looks perfect. You were very brave, Emily." "Just like her dad," a voice called from the hallway. Several veterans who had been part of Jack's old unit stepped into view, including the buddy who had first connected him with Hayes. They carried flowers and a teddy bear wearing combat boots. Emily's face lit up at the gifts, though her movements remained careful and slow as she reached for the teddy bear. "He looks just like Daddy," she giggled softly, referring to the miniature combat boots. The celebration outside grew louder as more people arrived. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes extending skyward. Reporters interviewed veterans and townspeople, capturing the spirit of unity that had brought this moment to pass. "Emily," Hayes said, checking her monitors one more time, "would you like to see all the people who came to support you? We can take you out to the balcony for a few minutes if you feel strong enough." Emily nodded eagerly, though Jack noticed she still moved with careful slowness. "Can we, Daddy?" "If Dr. Hayes says it's safe," Jack agreed, his protective instincts warring with his desire to let Emily see the impact she'd had on so many lives. Hayes nodded reassuringly. "Just for a few minutes. We'll bundle her up warm." The nurses helped transfer Emily to a wheelchair, wrapping her in blankets and ensuring all her monitoring equipment moved smoothly with her. Jack pushed the wheelchair while Hayes walked alongside, keeping a professional eye on his patient. As they approached the balcony doors, the sound of the crowd grew stronger. Someone below must have spotted movement because a ripple of excitement passed through the gathered people. Jack carefully wheeled Emily out onto the balcony. The autumn air was crisp but not too cold, and the late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over everything. The crowd below erupted in cheers when they spotted her, and Emily's eyes went wide with amazement. "Emily! Emily! Emily!" The chant started somewhere in the crowd and spread quickly, hundreds of voices calling her name in unison. People waved flags and banners, and someone released a cluster of pink balloons into the sky. Emily raised her hand in a small wave, and the cheering grew even louder. Jack stood behind her wheelchair, one hand on her shoulder, watching as his daughter's courage and faith touched hundreds of hearts. He saw veterans standing at attention, mothers wiping tears from their eyes, and children Emily's age holding up hand-drawn pictures. "See, Daddy?" Emily said, turning her face up to look at him. "I told you we weren't alone." Jack had to swallow hard before he could respond. "You were right, sweetheart. You were right all along." The crowd below continued to cheer, their voices carrying a message of hope and unity that echoed off the hospital walls. Emily sat in her wheelchair, small but mighty, a smile of pure joy on her face as she witnessed the power of faith, love, and community coming together in her name. Sunlight streamed through the hospital window, casting a warm glow across Emily's bed where she sat propped up against her pillows. Her tongue poked out slightly in concentration as she carefully colored another heart on a pink piece of construction paper. Scattered around her were dozens of thank you cards she'd made for the nurses, each one decorated with hearts, flowers, and messages of gratitude written in her careful 9-year-old handwriting. "Look, Daddy." Emily held up her latest creation. "This one's for Nurse Sarah. She always brought me extra Jell-O." Jack smiled from his chair beside her bed, his heart swelling at the sight of color returning to his daughter's cheeks. The dark circles under her eyes were fading, and her smile, that precious smile he'd feared he might lose, grew stronger each day. A knock at the door drew their attention. Dr. Hayes stood in the doorway, his white coat crisp and his silver hair neatly combed, but his eyes carried the warmth of a friend rather than the clinical detachment of a surgeon. "How's my favorite patient today?" Hayes asked, stepping into the room. "Dr. Hayes," Emily's face lit up, "I'm making thank you cards. Would you like one too?" "I'd be honored," Hayes replied, his voice gentle. He picked up one of her finished cards, admiring the careful artwork. "These are beautiful, Emily. You have quite a talent." Jack stood, extending his hand to Hayes. The two men shook hands, but it wasn't enough. Jack pulled Hayes into a tight embrace, his voice thick with emotion. "I can never thank you enough. Not just for saving Emily, but—" He pulled back, wiping his eyes. "You helped me believe again. In people. In hope. In—" He glanced at Emily, who was already absorbed in creating a special card for Hayes. "In faith." Hayes squeezed Jack's shoulder. "You saved my life once, Jack. But watching Emily recover, seeing her spirit touch so many lives, I think she saved all of us in her own way." A commotion in the hallway drew their attention. Through the open door, they could see hospital staff gathering around a television mounted on the wall. The news was showing footage of the hospital board chairman reading a statement. "In light of recent events," the chairman's voice crackled through the TV speakers, "the entire board has submitted their resignations, effective immediately. We acknowledge our failures and the pain we've caused. New leadership will be appointed with a mandate to ensure no child is ever denied life-saving care due to financial circumstances." Jack watched as the nurses and doctors in the hallway broke into applause. Some were hugging, others wiping away tears. The policy that had nearly cost Emily her life was being dismantled. "They're calling it the Emily Miller Rule," Hayes said quietly. "Every child who needs emergency surgery will receive it, regardless of their family's ability to pay. Your daughter's story changed everything." Emily looked up from her artwork, her blue eyes wide. "Really? Other kids won't have to be scared like I was?" "That's right, sweetheart," Jack said, his voice catching. "You helped make that happen." The afternoon brought more visitors. Veterans who had stood vigil during Emily's ordeal filed into the room in small groups, their faces breaking into broad smiles at the sight of her sitting up and coloring. Many wore their service medals, which glinted in the sunlight. "There's our little fighter," called out Rodriguez, a former Marine who had organized many of the protests. He carried a teddy bear wearing a tiny military uniform. Emily's delighted laugh rang out as she hugged the bear. The sound filled the room like music, transforming the sterile hospital space into something warmer, more human. Jack watched as she showed her cards to the veterans, who oohed and ah-hed over each one with genuine appreciation. The room that had once felt like a prison now buzzed with life and hope. Nurses stopped by to collect their cards, their eyes glistening as they read Emily's heartfelt messages. Even the most hardened veterans melted at her innocent wisdom and generous spirit. Jack leaned against the wall, taking in the scene. Where once he had paced in desperation, he now stood in peaceful gratitude. Emily sat in her bed, surrounded by people whose lives she had touched, her laughter mixing with theirs as she shared her artwork and stories. Her stuffed bunny sat propped against her pillow, watching over the joyful gathering like a faithful guardian. "Sometimes the smallest hearts are the strongest," Hayes murmured, standing beside Jack. "And sometimes they teach the rest of us how to be better humans." Jack nodded, unable to speak as he watched Emily hold court in her hospital room, her smile brighter than any sunshine that had ever graced these walls. The fear and darkness that had gripped this room just days ago had been transformed by the power of his daughter's unwavering faith and the community that had rallied around her. Another peal of laughter rang out as one of the veterans showed Emily a magic trick with a coin. The joy in that sound, the pure delight of a child who had faced death and emerged stronger, filled every corner of the once bleak hospital room. It was the sound of healing, not just of Emily's heart, but of an entire community that had come together to save her. The early morning air was crisp and fresh as Jack's old pickup truck rumbled to a stop at Carson Park. The sun hadn't quite risen yet, painting the sky in gentle shades of pink and purple. Emily bounced in her seat, her energy fully restored after weeks of recovery at home. "Ready for our sunrise walk, sweetheart?" Jack asked, reaching over to help unbuckle her seatbelt. "Just like we used to do with Mommy?" Emily's eyes sparkled with excitement. Her small hand touched the fading scar on her chest, now a badge of courage beneath her favorite yellow sweater. "Just like that." Jack's voice softened at the memory. He climbed out and walked around to Emily's door, lifting her down even though she insisted she could do it herself. The park was peaceful at this hour. Dew sparkled on the grass, and birds called their morning songs from the trees. Jack and Emily walked hand in hand down the familiar path that curved around the small lake. It was the same route they'd walked hundreds of times before, back when Sarah was still with them. Emily skipped beside him, her brown curls bouncing with each step. "Look, Daddy, the ducks are back." She pointed to a family of mallards gliding across the still water. Jack squeezed her hand gently. "They sure are. Just like you're back, strong and healthy." They found their favorite bench, the one with the perfect view of the rising Sunday. Emily climbed up and patted the space next to her. Jack sat down, wrapping his arm around her small shoulders. "I prayed for you every night in the hospital," Emily said, leaning against him. "Even when I was really scared." Jack's throat tightened. "You were braver than me, Emmy. I almost lost my faith there for a while." "But you didn't give up," Emily said firmly. She traced the outline of a heart on his arm with her finger. "You fought for me, just like you fought for our country." Jack looked down at his daughter, marveling at her wisdom. "You know what kept me going? Something you said in the chapel that night. About faith being believing even when you can't see." Emily nodded solemnly. "That's what Mommy always said. She said God gives us hard times to make us stronger, like how the caterpillar has to struggle to become a butterfly." The first rays of sunlight began to peek over the horizon, turning the lake into liquid gold. Jack thought about the past few weeks, the despair that had nearly consumed him, the unexpected kindness of strangers, and the strength of a community coming together. "Dr. Hayes called yesterday," Jack mentioned, watching a pair of cardinals dart between trees. "He wanted to check on you." Emily's face lit up. "He's nice. Did you know he brings candy to all his patients now?" "He says it's because of me." Jack chuckled. "You have that effect on people, sweetheart. You help them remember what matters most. Like how all those people came to help us?" Emily asked. "Even though they didn't know us?" "Exactly like that." Jack pulled her closer. "Sometimes we forget how much good there is in the world. Sometimes it takes a little girl with a big heart to remind us." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun climb higher. The morning joggers and dog walkers began to appear on the paths, each offering a friendly wave or greeting. Word had spread through their small town about Emily's miracle, and she had become something of a local celebrity. "Daddy?" Emily's voice was thoughtful. "Remember when you used to say that bad things just happen sometimes, and we can't change them?" Jack nodded, recalling his darker days after Sarah's death. "I think you were wrong," she continued. "We can't change the bad things, but we can change how we handle them. Like how you didn't let the hospital stop you from helping me get better." Jack blinked back tears, amazed once again by his daughter's insight. "When did you get so smart?" Emily giggled. "I got it from Mommy. And from you." She stood up on the bench, putting her at eye level with him. "You know what else? I think Mommy would be really proud of us." "Yeah?" Jack's voice cracked slightly. "Yeah. Because we didn't give up. And now we're helping other people too." She was right. Since Emily's surgery, Jack had been working with veteran groups to create a foundation helping military families access medical care. The hospital's policy changes were just the beginning. The sun was fully up now, warming their faces. Emily hopped down from the bench and tugged at Jack's hand. "Can we walk to the playground? I want to try the swings." "Are you sure you're ready for that?" Jack asked, though he already knew the answer. The doctors had cleared her for normal activities, and Emily had been eager to make up for lost time. "I'm ready for everything now," she declared with a confident smile that reminded him so much of Sarah. They started walking hand in hand along the path, Emily occasionally stopping to pick up interesting leaves or pretty stones. The morning light caught her hair, creating a soft halo effect that made Jack's heart swell with love and gratitude. "You know what, Emmy?" Jack said as they walked. "You were right about another thing, too." "What's that?" "When you said God gave you back your heart so you could love more people. Look at all the lives you've touched. All the people you've helped just by being you. Emily swung their joined hands back and forth. That's because love is like a candle, Daddy. When you share it with others, it doesn't get smaller, it just makes more light. They reached the playground, but instead of running ahead as she usually did, Emily stayed by Jack's side, her small hand warm in his. Together, they walked toward the rising sun, their shadows stretching behind them on the dewy grass. The morning light seemed to wrap around them like a warm embrace, full of promise and possibility. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Jack Miller, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.